French farmers continue to protest as unions called for a blockade of Paris on Monday.
Almost the entire population of 2.2 million in Gaza face extreme hunger since Israel launched its offensive against Hamas last October.
US President Joe Biden says that the US shall respond after a drone strike in Jordan kills 3 American soldiers.
A plan to develop the African continent and stem the spread of migration to Europe has been unveiled at a summit in Rome.
French farmers continue to protest as unions called for a blockade of Paris on Monday. An army of tractors is to take over all of the motorways leading to Paris. They demand from the government better remuneration for their produce and protection against cheap imports. Meanwhile, France's new Prime Minister Gabriel Attal has announced key concessions to protesting farmers. In the move, the government hopes will end the growing demonstrations. Government officials say they are working on preventing a Paris blockade.
Donc pas de tracteurs qui rentrent dans Paris ou dans les grandes villes de province. Pour ce qui concerne l'Île-de-France, le fait que le marché de Rungis international puisse continuer à fonctionner et également les grands aéroports parisiens, Roissy et Orly, et c'est aussi le cas des aéroports provinciaux. Donc cette position défensive amène à utiliser des moyens très importants. 15 000 policiers et gendarmes sont mobilisés pour pouvoir garantir cela.
Protests have been happening all across Europe. In Italy, farmers from north to south are protesting for the same reasons: fuel prices, damages from bad weather and competition from non-EU countries. In Larissa, the largest city of the Telassi region in Greece, farmers also blocked the streets with their tractors over high costs and compensation payments.
Former Prime Minister Alexander Stubb of the National Coalition won the first round of Finland's presidential election and will face former Foreign Minister Pekka Haavisto of the Green Party in the second round in 2 weeks. Stubb received 27.2% of the votes, while Haavisto 25.8%.
This election in Finland is important because the role of the president has become more fundamental. In times of war and in times of NATO membership, president takes care of foreign affairs and defense have become increasingly important in Finland.
Voter turnout was estimated to be at 74.9%, as voters recognize that the role of the president is more important today as never before.
Tosi jännittävää. Kaikkeen mitä maailmassa tällä hetkellä tapahtuu tai meneillään, niin tuntuu, että pakko mennä äänestää. Siinä on joku vaikutus johonkin.
Both candidates have reaffirmed late on Sunday that their foreign policy dispositions are pretty much similar, maintaining firm stance and at the same time doing everything possible through diplomatic channels.
Since Israel launched its offensive against Hamas last October, around 85% of the people living in Gaza are now displaced, with almost the entire population of 2.2 million facing extreme hunger.
Pretty much everyone in Gaza relies on aid, but with food deliveries facing more restrictions, many have been pushed to the brink of starvation. The WFP, together with other UN agencies, have recently called for an easier and faster access to humanitarian aid. The joint statement said that more entry routes and more trucks being allowed through border checks each day are needed for enough supplies to reach the Palestinians in Gaza. We got a chance to speak with the Deputy Executive Director of the WFP to discuss the food access situation in Gaza and the challenges the UN agency is facing.
Well, the situation is really desperate, really dire. The entire population, 2.2 million people, are in desperate need of food assistance. They're all in a crisis level. We have done what we call the IPC report, which shows that everyone is in crisis level. A quarter of the population, 500,000 people, are in catastrophic levels, and it's unprecedented, its scale, its gravity, but also at the pace of how things are moving at the moment. We might have a famine around the corner unless we have a major change in terms of how our assistance are reaching the most vulnerable people.
Compared to before the war, the daily number of aid trucks entering Gaza has dropped from over 500 to just 30.
It's tremendous bureaucracy in terms of getting from either Jordan into to Gaza, or from Egypt for that matter into Gaza. And so we need to simplify to make sure that we can get volumes to the borders. Then we need to get this across the borders. There is nothing to wait for here. We need to change the situation now in order to save lives on a daily basis.
A full famine could add to a death toll that has already crossed 25,000. Giorgia Orlandi for Euronews in Rome.
US President Joe Biden says the US shall respond after a drone strike in Jordan killed 3 American troops during a church visit in South Carolina. Biden attributed the attack to Iran-backed militia groups. The strike, which took place near the Syrian border, is the first attack to kill US soldiers after the war began on October 7th. Since then, Iranian-backed militias have struck multiple American military installations in Iraq and in Syria. Israel Defense Forces released a video of what it says are strikes on Hezbollah targets in southern Lebanon. In Gaza City, several people were killed when a residential building was hit in an airstrike late Sunday, health officials said in Gaza. The Palestinian death toll now mounts to over 26,000 people since Hamas's deadly October 7 attack on Israel. Meanwhile, Israeli politicians and activists gathered in Jerusalem on Sunday night for a conference calling for return to the Jewish settlements in Gaza and the northern West Bank that were evacuated during Israel's 2005 disengagement.
Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni has opened the Africa Summit in Rome, unveiling the country's development plan for the continent. Her government hopes this will stem migration to Europe, diversify energy sources and forge a new relationship between Europe and Africa. But it received a lukewarm reception among African leaders who said they would have liked to have been consulted before Italy rolled out its plan. The event's been attended by 24 African leaders, top EU and UN officials and representatives from international lending institutions.
Turkish law enforcement officials detained 2 people suspected of attacking a Catholic church in Istanbul on Sunday. According to Turkish Interior Minister, they are Tajikistan and Russian nationals and members of Daesh, also known as the Islamic State. 2 masked gunmen attacked the Roman Catholic Santa Maria Church on Sunday at midday, killing 1 person. According to Turkish media, most of the congregation are Italians living in Turkey.
President Vladimir Putin has been formally registered by Russia's Electoral Commission as a candidate in the presidential election in March, a vote in which the 71-year-old is all but certain to win another 6-year term in office. Putin is running as an independent for the 2nd time, but retains his tight control over the Russian political system that he established during his 24 years in power. With around an 80% popularity rating, he dominates a landscape where independent media have been banned and his opponents silenced or imprisoned.
Bullfighting resumed amid activists protesting outside the largest bull ring in the world in Mexico City on Sunday, after the country's highest court temporarily revoked a local ruling that sided with animal rights defenders and suspended the events for more than a year and a half.
Esto, la verdad es que es demasiado sádico. Estamos en contra de la tortura, de la matanza, de que sea un entretenimiento y que se aplauda, que se protejan. No puede seguir siendo esto en el pleno siglo en el que estamos.
The court will now have to decide whether bullfighting affects animal welfare. The legal battle in the Mexican capital is far from over. The Fiesta Brava, which some see as a form of art and is part of Mexican culture, is allowed in most of the country.
At least 13 people were injured after more than 40 vehicles got involved in a major crash on a one-direction and narrow bridge in Maryland, crossing the Chesapeake Bay. Traffic was blocked for about 6 hours. Local authorities report that the initial collision involved 23 vehicles and more than 20 were caught in subsequent secondary crashes. 2 of the wounded were sent to hospital with serious but not life-threatening injuries. The reason of the accident remains unknown. A candidate for the right-wing Alternative for Germany party, Uwe Throm, narrowly lost the race for the district administrator's chair in Saale-Orla district of Thuringia to the Christian Democrat candidate Christian Hergott. The defeat comes shortly after the party's plan for mass deportation of foreigners was revealed. The news triggered protests across the country. The rise of AfD's popularity has been causing concerns among politicians, with some regional elections coming up in September and the EU elections in June.
Tourism in Europe, the world's most visited continent, is set to return to pre-pandemic levels this year. Some 758 million people are expected to visit some of its beaches or cities by 2024. But as visitor numbers grow, so does the pressure on the environment and tensions between tourists and the local people. Venice has introduced quotas on the number of visitors entering the city on a daily basis, and the Netherlands stopped promoting itself as a tourist destination 5 years ago. Big players are now thinking about how to make tourism socially and environmentally sustainable.
España está apostando cada vez más por un turismo sostenible para aquellos visitantes que desean huir de las masificaciones, un turismo a otro ritmo, como estos caminos naturales para recorrer España a pie o en bicicleta.
Countries are opting for new strategies and the opening of new destinations to reduce visitor numbers in areas stressed by tourism.
Estas concentraciones suelen darse sobre todo en zonas de costa en periodo estival. Lo que estamos tratando de poner en valor es otro tipo de producto que se puede consumir a lo largo de todo el año y no solamente el producto de sol y playa, ¿no? Como puede ser el turismo de naturaleza, el turismo de ciudades, el turismo gastronómico, el turismo cultural.
Climate change is one of the major threats to the sector. Heat waves and drought are affecting destinations like Greece and Spain, which are already indicating that it will have to introduce water restrictions this summer in some coastal areas.
Primero, hacer viajes más sostenibles. Y para hacer un viaje más sostenible hay varias maneras de hacerlo. Primero es asegurar que los aviones, cuando pueden, utilicen el fuel más sostenible de aviación que se puede encontrar en el mercado.
Tourism is estimated to contribute 8% of total greenhouse gas emissions. Now, the sector faces the challenge of reducing its carbon footprint to ensure its future.